Segment 4, the journalist goes to war. You write in War, quote, pure objectivity, difficult enough to achieve while covering a city council meeting, isn't remotely possible in war. Objectivity and honesty are not the same, though, and it is entirely possible to write with honesty about the very personal and distorting experiences of war, close quote. Okay, so objectivity is impossible in war. Somehow you can't mean to suggest that John Burns, the great foreign correspondent for the New York Times, was sending home biased dispatches from Iraq. Do you, or do you?
Well, let's move it back a generation. I don't think the American press corps in World War II was evaluating the Nazi point of view objectively. And I don't think they should have been. I think it is possible to be objective about political considerations. When it comes to the killing of people, I think it's very hard to be objective. And if you are with Iraqi civilians and you're watching civilians get killed by American firepower, I think it's very, very hard to be objective about American foreign policy. Likewise, if you're with American soldiers and watching them get killed and nearly getting killed yourself by the Taliban, you're not going to be objective about the Taliban. The bond that you create with the men you're with is really the least of your problems when it comes to objectivity.
So if you say objectivity is not possible in war, you're saying objectivity does not in some way exist in this book, at least in a kind of tried or formulaic way. So what's the bias here?
Well, one of the things that really interested me was my own emotional reactions, because I felt that they mirrored the emotional reality of the soldiers. I mean, I'm a civilian, I didn't carry a gun, but my reactions were not completely different. So as I became included in this platoon, became friends with these guys, became concerned about them, and they became concerned about me, my level of fear in combat melted. It went away. And I had an insight into how they psychologically dealt with combat. So what I became interested in, I didn't want to deny my emotional connection to these guys. It actually became a topic of great interest because I started to understand in that connection there lay the secret to how people deal with psychologically unmanageable situations. They deal with them and they actually even find some good in them.
Again, quoting from War, we reporters had our own issues. Vietnam was our paradigm, our template for how not to get hoodwinked by the U.S. military, and it exerted such a powerful influence that anything short of implacable cynicism sometimes felt like a sellout. I'd never been censored at all, and once I'd asked a public affairs officer to help me fact-check an article, and he'd answered, sure, but you can't actually show it to me. That would be illegal, close quote. So you just said that during World War II, the American press was not objective in covering the Nazis. And it seems as though you're saying that in Vietnam they weren't objective in covering Americans. The bias worked the other way. Did you have the sense that in Afghanistan the press was in some way guiltier of fighting the last war than the generals?
Yeah, I think they were. Not everybody, and not anybody all the time, but I think there was a bit of a feeling of that, and I sensed it in myself. I mean, a public affairs officer would tell me something, and I would watch my brain go, "Oh yeah, right." And there was some manipulation of the facts by the public affairs, as there is, with any corporate endeavor that's trying to put a good face on things. But for the most part, they were pretty straight with me. And it was my cynicism that I actually had to it's tricky. You don't want to be crippled by your own cynicism, but you also don't want to be taken advantage of.
Right.
So the press is it's a difficult balancing act. And the military itself, I think, had their own sort of like assumptions that the press was out to just put a knife in their back. Neither was entirely true, but I think those were a hangover from Vietnam, and I'm hoping with the embed system that will get worked out.
Vietnam was fought by draftees while the rest of the nation was dropping acid. Afghanistan, on the other hand, was being fought by volunteers who more or less respected their commanders and had the gratitude of the vast majority of Americans back home, close quote. All right, you've said already, and you make the point a number of times in the book, that under combat, you don't think about politics. But how important was it to those young men with whom you were embedded that they at some level they did respect the reasons, the political reasons they were there?
You know, they're 19, 20 years old. They're not thinking much about the political reasons that they're there. They might have joined the military because of 9/11. That was the closest they got to political thinking about the war that I saw. The opinion of the public wasn't very relevant to them out there.
Mm-hmm.
It became very relevant when they went home. That was when it became important. Out there, it wasn't. I mean, they would get care packages from anonymous people, and they registered the fact that that was a very generous thing for people to do, and that they had some support back home. But it really became important when they came back or on leave, and they're walking through the airport, and people are coming up to them saying, "Thank you for your service." Or one guy went home on leave, and someone in first class. I mean, he was filthy. He'd come off a combat operation. He was still covered in dirt on a flight from Houston to Portland, I think. And a guy in first class said, "Oh, give me your ticket. I'm going to sit where you're sitting and sit in my seat."
Was it important to them that it was a volunteer army?
The soldiers...
Nobody had been drafted to go to that valley.
No one had been drafted. Everyone in that unit that I was with chose to join the Army. If you want to change oil on Humvees in a rear base and draw a paycheck, you can do that. These guys in the Army, they chose to be in a combat unit. They had to work very hard to get into that unit, and they were very, very proud of it. None of them talked about how, oh, it's too bad there's not a draft. We'd have more guys out here. None of them talked like that.
None of that?
No, zero.
And last question, you said they more or less respected their commanders. You talked to folks at a very senior level. Did you end up respecting the commanders?
Oh, tremendously.
You did?
Yeah. I mean, I was in a very bad place, and I've learned about the U.S. military. They are smart enough that they don't put bad units, bad officers in bad places because they'll get chewed up. They put the best people in there. And so because I was in the Korengal, the officers that I met were just like, oh, my God, were they smart.
Really?
They're incredible guys.